Hello, everyone. I thought I would post a Chapter 12 presentation, and this is the chapter on hunger, eating, and health. Why do many people eat too much? Okay, so this is what they're asked. That's the big question your authors are asking for the chapter on hunger and eating. This chapter goes over a lot of good stuff, general theories of weight management and so forth. It covers a lot of metabolism, so you learn a bit about metabolism in this chapter. You learn about the neural mechanisms of hunger, what starts a meal, what stops a meal, all that kind of stuff. Um, and so you can, of course, when you go through the PowerPoints, these are all the learning objectives and so forth. It gives you, gives you an idea of what's going to be covered. There's a lot of stuff here. Um, this is this chapter on hunger is pretty complicated. I always tell my class that if you could invent the diet pill that actually works without, the bad side effects that many weight control drugs in the past have had, I think you'd be quite rich. Because there isn't one. There is no effective, there's certainly no magic pill here. And it's because metabolism and hunger, there's just so many factors involved. There's a lot of different parts of the brain that are involved, pretty complex mechanisms. So at least this chapter, you get to learn a little bit about that. This is also an important chapter in the sense, and one of the things that's mentioned here is obesity, for example. Um, there's a lot of research onto what causes hunger. What are the different mechanisms, the different hormonal signals, uh, neural, the different neural pathways that are involved, the transmitters that are involved in the brain, what parts of the brain, what cell types, the types of neurons in the brain that are involved with this kind of stuff, because obesity is becoming more and more of a problem. And kind of going in here, you can see if you go to the Center for Disease Control, they have a lot of resources out there about this. And what's interesting, this is kind of not since the COVID-19 is um, all what's on most people's minds right now. If you go to the CDC site, you can see here. This is interesting. Severe obesity, a BMI of 40 or higher, may raise risk of severe illness. This is something I've noticed. In some of the coverage of this that being heavy, we often talk about if someone that increased weight is generally associated with a lot of health problems. And apparently, at least with some of the statistics coming out now, having a high BMI of 40 or higher, excuse me, is tends to raise the risk of getting, if you get the COVID-19 virus, it can increase the chance of complications and such. But here you can see what is the body mass index. Most of you are probably familiar with that to a certain extent. You can see it's person's weight in kilograms divided by the square of height in meters. All right, but you basically get an idea there. And here you can see if the BMI ranges. If it's under 18.5, that's underweight. 18.5 to 25 is normal. 25 to 30 is overweight. 30 or higher is in the obese. Um, 40 or higher is extreme or severe obesity. All right, so this is, and apparently the 40 or higher makes it is a risk factor. I'm mentioning all of this now because it kind of demonstrates the importance of an understanding of how hunger mechanisms and metabolic mechanisms work, because you can see here, well, also on the CDC, you can see all the different facts. You can go to the site here, you can see obesity prevalence. Obesity is becoming increasingly common in the United States, and these are some of the maps. The CDC has tons of stats. They break it down by ethnicity, by the states, and all that kind of stuff, all kinds of stuff. And here you can see the United States, and they color code the percentage prevalence of self-reported obesity among U.S. adults by state and territory. This was back in 2018, so it's relatively new. Um, it gives you an idea. So, for example, here in Florida, looks like approximately 30 to 35% of the adult population falls within the obese range. Um, these, by the way, if you look at historically, this map was quite different if we go back to the 1970s. Um, and you can see, like out here, traditionally out west, the weight tends to be lower. But this has increased. And then you can see here in the deep south, like Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, it's even higher, all right? But you can see a large, interestingly enough, North Dakota, But you can see here's the middle of the country, mostly in the upper range. Um, and Colorado, interestingly enough, and DC is, Colorado has traditionally been a state that's had less obesity. I wish I could see the historically, because I know like I said, back in the 1970s and 80s, we did not see this nearly as much. And so it's something to consider, what's going on here. Why does it keep increasing? Because that's basically what we find. It's been increasing over the years. Um, you can see here across states, all states and territories had more than 20% of adults with obesity, and so forth. The South tends to be the highest. Okay, the South and the Midwest have the highest prevalence, followed by the Northeast and the West. All right, so I'm only showing this because it's a health problem. Right? It's potentially a health problem. Of course, individuals, it gets a bit more complicated in terms of how much having the weight's going to really affect your health or not. And certainly, being thin does not mean that you cannot that you're just no. There's no problems with health. That's not necessarily true either. But it is something to consider. Okay, so let me get back into the PowerPoint. All right. So what about digestion? All right. So your chapter goes into the basic digestive processes. You can see all of this here. Digestion involves chewing, saliva production. Food, of course, moves down your esophagus. It's broken down into its component parts so that the cells can get engaged in metabolism. The small intestine is involved with the absorption of the food. The duodenum breaks down the proteins, the starches, and so forth, and then it's eventually excreted by the colon. One of the things that's getting a bit more attention here is the gut bacteria, the microbiome of the gut. There's actually research now on the gut-brain axis, as it's called, the notion that what's the bacteria that's in your gut and the digestive system can actually affect mental activity, which is interesting because there's a lot of nerves in the gut, and the bacteria that are there can affect those nerves. So that's kind of an interesting. So it's a new line of research. But here you can see the overview of the system. Obviously, when we eat, salivation increases. That's part of that helps break down the food. There's the esophagus, your stomach. Right here, there's the liver. Then there's the stomach. There's the duodenum in here. This is the large intestine. This is basically involved with the excretion. The small intestine's huge, and it's wrapped up rather tightly, but you can go through all of the different stages there, and so forth. One of the things that we need food for is, of course, energy. And you can see that we get energy from glucose and so forth. We also tend to store energy, right, in the form of what's glycogen. This is found in the liver, and also fats. So this is for long-term storage. It's kind of interesting. Here you can see distribution of energy storage. There's a certain amount in the muscle, and there's a great amount of energy storage in the fat. That's why if someone is on a diet for a long time, if they don't eat as much, they're going to tend to start drawing from this long-term reserve, basically, eventually, through a lot of exercise and dieting. Make sure you go through here. You can see the different phases of metabolism, the cephalic, absorptive, fasting, and so forth. Glucagon is this is something like I mentioned. The liver essentially serves as a short-term storage of calories, basically, of energy. All right, so that's what the glucagon refers to, and this is all in your text. Insulin is a substance that allows the glucose to get into the cells of the body. All right, so that's a critical component. Without proper insulin, cells begin to starve, essentially. But here you can see the different phases, and you can see there's this interplay with levels of insulin versus glucagon and so forth, and you can look at all of this here. So you can see, for example, the cephalic phase. This is the preparatory phase. This is you're getting ready to eat. Insulin levels tend to be high. All right, that's once again that's getting ready to start that meal. Insulin tends to go up because this is going to allow, after eating, when eventually you get things like glucose and so forth available to the cells, it'll get into there. All right, it'll get into those cells. So you can see here, utilization of blood glucose as a source of energy, conversion of excess glucose to glycogen and fat. So this is what happens. anything that's you eat beyond your metabolic needs is going to be converted into fat storage and also glycogen, which is stored in the liver. Um, you can see here, yeah, storage of glycogen in the liver and the muscle, fat in the adipose tissue, and protein in muscle. All right, so and so forth. Then you have the absorptive phase, and this obviously you're getting your nutrients, and then fasting. This happens when you're, let's say, sleeping, when you go a number of hours without eating. You can see here, insulin tends to drop because you're not getting ready for eating at that point. But anyhow, you can look through all of this here. Um, how do we maintain our weight? This is sort of interesting, and I said that in the beginning that it's very, we don't have a magic pill that can control someone's diet, that can control their hunger effectively. Um, but if we want to develop ways, if we want to understand, um, weight management, we kind of have to have a theory to start with as to what exactly is going on in the first place. What is the mechanisms by which we get hungry and we get satiated? What's going on there? And there's, the so-called set points could be a start. Um, the notion of a set point is that your body basically, there's this sort of ideal weight that your body is working to maintain, essentially. It's like a feedback system, like your thermostat. So if you set your thermostat to 75 degrees, it's going to more or less work to keep the temperature at 75 degrees in your home based on feedback systems, right? It's like a feedback loop. And this is the essence of homeostasis, all right? So perhaps maybe there's a certain ideal level of glucose in the blood, or there's an ideal level of, let's say, fat, or the lipostatic set point, an ideal amount of that. Um, and that's what's, the assumption there is that the body seeks to maintain a point. So here you can see the set point view is at the basis of many people's thinking about hunger and eating. So that's, the idea is that you're going to tend to eat the amount of food that's going to tend to keep you at a particular weight, or at least a narrow range of weights, right? So if your set point is 155 pounds, for example, or it's 135 or 200, whatever, the theory really is that the body is going to, quote unquote, try to stay at that average weight, and so it's going to be really hard to lose that weight. All right, and correspondingly, it might be difficult to gain the weight past that. You'll tend to keep at that particular range. And here you can see that there's some weaknesses, though. One of the problems with the set point, is it's not consistent with other data. You know, you know, uh, the idea is that you're going to adjust meal. It's almost like that you're going to tend to eat only what you need to. It kind of ignores things like taste and learning and social influences. So think about it. If food was really not pleasurable to consume, then we probably would just eat what we need to eat, right? But it doesn't explain why people overeat, right? It doesn't explain the effects of culture on food intake and stuff like that. For example, people with excess amounts of fat should be eating less because they don't need to. They don't. If you have excess amounts of fat, you should not eat too much because you have plenty of fat storage. You should overall, but that's not what happens. So there's problems with it. There's some problems with it. It also doesn't account for the fact that people can gain weight fairly easily sometimes. Um, you know, so there's other. So you can see some other theories here. Sometimes there's some theories that emphasize pleasure, and this is something I like to mention in class. A lot of times in these chapters, it goes over the mechanisms of starting a meal, stopping a meal in the brain, and stuff like that. What are the neural mechanisms that are activated that are associated with hunger, and what are the mechanisms that are activated that tend to be associated with what we call satiety, where you're not eating anymore, you're tired of eating, you're full. Those are great, but they tend to view the whole thing as a homeostatic mechanism. You eat what you need to, then you stop. But it doesn't account for the fact that eating can be a pleasurable experience. So if you're eating, you might very well, I'm sure all of you have had that experience. I know I have. You're eating something, you're not hungry anymore, but you're eating it because it's enjoyable. All right. Also, there's some interesting things. Sometimes people will tend to eat, um, at certain times of the day. Also, social is kind of interesting. Why is it that when other people are eating around you, you might tend to eat as well? Almost like a modeling effect. Um, okay. Okay. So let's keep going here. I want to go into, I can't get through all, I don't want to go through all of this. I want to get, let me see here. Yeah, this goes into the neural mechanisms. I'm going to get into that a little bit later because I'm going to have to divide this up into a couple of lectures. There's a lot here. Um, let's see here. I want to go into some of these things. Okay. Role of the gastrointestinal tract in satiety. All right. So if we're talking about hunger and satiety, once again, satiety is when you no longer want to eat. Um, Here you can see this is a classic study by Cannon and Washburn. All right. So what you can do in these studies is you have the subjects in the study, these animals, swallow a balloon and then it's inflated. So the idea is the balloon can be inserted into the stomach and expand it. Then that causes the stomach to expand. One of the signals to stop eating is a full stomach, right? Um, and so you can play around with the stomach to see the role that the stomach plays in and other parts of the gastrointestinal tract play into to produce hunger or not. Animals with stomachs removed only eat what is needed to maintain weight. This is sort of interesting. Um, and here you can see this is a preparation. I actually do this with people. Um, this is an old one. The system developed by Cannon and Washburn in 1912 for measuring stomach contractions, so they can actually measure that. They found that large stomach contractions related to hunger pangs. All right, and you've had that experience. You feel, oh, my stomach is gurgling, it's contracting. Well, that's the hunger pain. All right. Um, what happens though is that when you eat, certain chemicals are released. All right, certain chemicals in the gastrointestinal tract are released. Certain peptides, for example, um, and some of these chemicals tend to be associated with satiety, which are shown here, and some are associated with hunger. So, for example, cholecystokinin here, CCK, when this goes up in levels, it tends to be related to a feeling of satiety and fullness. And then you can see some of these other ones, somatostatins, glucagons, and so forth. Contrast that with ghrelin, orexin, neuropeptide Y. These are peptides that they tend to be elevated when you're in a state of hunger, essentially. Okay, and you can see here also, the serotonin also plays a role. So this is interesting. So once again, kind of going back to the set point again. Set point theories cannot account for certain things here. Large changes in body weight. Okay, so that can happen to people sometimes. The obesity problems that we're having. So once again, the idea there is that if hunger worked purely, in terms of a homeostatic mechanism, people would not eat. They would not overeat. Excuse me. They would not overeat. Um, you know, this is sort of interesting too. There's some research that on this that animals that go through a calorie restricted diet have greater longevity. So there's the research out there is kind of mixed on that. Um, Calorie restricted animals have less aging with energy metabolism shifts. So they're perhaps overeating actually causes a quote unquote aging effect in the animal. Um, Things like that. So the set point really is a good place to start, but it's not. It's not the end. Okay. Now, once again, though, there's different. You can look this over in your text. This is the leaky barrel model. You can look at that. But anyhow, here's the obesity again. Who needs to be concerned? Everyone. People who are aging, the next generation. Yeah, and I already went over some of the CDC stuff with you. Why is there an obesity epidemic? Like I showed you at the beginning here. These are just different proposals. Prevalence of fast food. This is controversial here. This one here, the evolutionary one. This is the notion that um, that somehow we are that our brains have essentially evolved to live in a society without food that's so readily available to eat. And because of that, we might be biologically prepared to just overeat because you never know when the next meal is. So I don't know if I buy this one. There's problems with this, but the idea is that um, we have evolved to prefer high calorie foods that are fattening. For example, we eat as much as we possibly can. We store it as fat, and then we use the calories efficiently. The thing about this is, if you're going to eat like this, you've got to burn a lot of energy. So if you're an athlete, this isn't as much of a problem. But if you lead a sedentary lifestyle, then this is not the way to go. Um, but the notion is that our brains are lagging behind our behavior, so to speak, and it's kind of a strange notion. I don't know if I believe that, but that's what the evolutionary psychology perspective has to say, I guess. Um, so why do some people become obese while others do not? Well, maybe differences in food preferences and so forth. Could be differences in metabolism. Maybe their basal, excuse me, metabolic rate is a little too low. Um, Genetic factors and so forth. Um, this is sort of interesting. Um, why are weight loss programs typically ineffective? This is interesting. There's a lot of a lot of folks that have weight problems. They have problems managing their weight. They do a diet for a while. They lose weight. And, I can't say enough how enormously difficult it is uh, especially as people get older, to pull the weight off and keep it off. It is extraordinarily difficult. Uh, and especially if you look at differences between males and females. Females tend to burn a little bit less resting metabolic. Their resting metabolism tends to be lower than a male, so it's even harder for females to do this. Although males and females both tend to start gaining weight as you get older, but um, this is all here. The motivation. Will you maintain that exercise? Will you continue eating foods that are not particularly tasty? Because let's face it, if you're on a diet, generally speaking, the food isn't particularly good. I mean, you can't eat what you want. Um, and physical activity is tough. A lot of people say, "Oh, I exercise and exercise, and nothing's changing." Um, your caloric expenditure is mostly just maintaining body temperature and stuff. That's the vast amount of your calories being, exercise is really, unless you are a monster athlete out there, you are really, taking a 30-minute walk or even on the treadmill for 30 minutes or even an hour really doesn't burn all that much energy. So that's why this is difficult for folks. And you can see here stages of weight loss programs. This is the begin diet. So you can see this is a person here. They lose, and they go back. The yo-yo effect, right? Weight loss occurs rapidly at the beginning. This happens to a lot of folks. As weight declines, the amount of energy, quote, leakage is automatically reduced, and this reduces the rate of weight loss. This is a compensatory. You are actually becoming, it becomes, so as you lose weight, it becomes more and more difficult to lose additional weight. And this is where some folks on a weight loss program might say, "Oh my God, I lost my 10 or 15 pounds really fast, and oh, now I've hit a plateau." Gradually, the reduced rate of intake is matched by the reduced energy output, and the new stable set point is achieved. So the idea here is that maybe there's this sort of set point possibly, but then you say, "Okay, I'm done with this." When the diet is terminated, weight gain is rapid because of the high incentive value of food and the low level of energy leakage. Then the weight accumulates, the incentive value of food gradually decreases, and the energy leakage increases until the original set point is regained. So here you can see this is up and down, back and forth. So yeah, this is just one perspective on why it is so difficult to maintain weight loss for a lot of folks who are struggling. So we can see there's just some other, leptin is something that might be important. Um, this is interesting here. Leptin, it's a hormone produced by fat cells, just to let you know. This was for a while considered to be a possible the role of leptin was thought, hey, we can control this, we can control obesity, and it didn't turn out that to be that easily accomplished. Once again, it's a hormone produced by fat cells. It tends to serve as a stop signal to eat. So in animals, it tends to decrease eating. So the idea is that as leptin goes up, eating should drop. Things like that. The arcuate nucleus here, that's a part of the brain and the hypothalamus, and later on I'll be talking about that. In humans who have low levels of leptin, administration can maintain a reasonable weight. So there is some success with this. You can see here, this is sort of interesting. This is the genetically obese mice. They cannot produce leptin. So here you see the one on the left. That is a genetically induced. This animal here on the left does not produce the substance leptin, and we see quite a bit bigger. It looks like he's twice as wide as his friend there. So that's why we're looking into some of that. Okay, so there's that. All right, I think I'm going to stop with this part one. There's a good amount here, so I'm going to go back next time and go in one of the neural mechanisms. But anyhow, I wanted to introduce some of these concepts to you, and I will be back with part two, and as usual, if there's any questions, please shoot me an email. I'm going to put this on the D2L site, and there'll be a place where you can, respond or whatnot with comments and such. But that's it. So take care, and I'm going to try to get this thing closed up. I think let me see, I got to get it closed up here if I can. If I can never do it, it's hard to get this thing. There we go. Okay, take care.